David Kim stood in the massive hallway of Harmony Prime Station and tried not to look as lost as he felt. The ceiling stretched so high above him that he could barely see where it ended. Alien creatures of every shape and size moved past him with purpose while he clutched his datapad and wondered if he had made a terrible mistake coming here. He was 28 years old, and this was his first real assignment off Earth. Back home, he had been a junior assistant to a minor diplomat. Now he was supposed to help represent all of humanity at the Centennial Peace Summit. The weight of that responsibility made his hands shake. The station was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Walls seemed to be made of light itself. Gardens grew in impossible spirals along the corridors. Music that had no source drifted through the air. Every species in the galaxy had contributed something to this place, and the result was overwhelming. David checked his datapad again. The seating chart showed him where the human delegation was supposed to sit, but the symbols kept changing. Translation errors, perhaps. He had been walking for 20 minutes and still had not found the right section. A group of tall blue aliens passed him and one of them laughed. David pretended not to notice. Humans were still new to galactic society. Only 15 years since first contact. Most species here had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. To them, humans were children playing at being adults. He turned a corner and found himself in a quieter area. The main assembly hall opened before him like the inside of a giant pearl. Seats arranged in circles around a central platform. Banners from hundreds of worlds hung from above. The air smelled like flowers he could not name. David looked at his datapad one more time. Section 7, row 12. He walked down a side passage and found the row. Most seats were already filled, but there was one empty seat near the end. The seat was draped in deep violet fabric and positioned slightly away from the others. It looked isolated. Perfect. He sat down gratefully. His feet hurt from walking. His back ached from carrying the datapad and 3 backup drives. He closed his eyes for just a moment and let himself breathe. The seat next to him rustled. Someone else sat down. David opened his eyes and glanced over. She was human, or at least she looked human. That was his first thought. Beautiful in a way that seemed almost unreal. She wore robes that shifted colors like oil on water. Her black hair was pulled back in an elaborate style. Her face was calm, but her eyes looked tired. She nodded at him. He nodded back. Relief flooded through him. Another human. Maybe she was part of the delegation, and he was in the right place after all. The woman settled into her seat and looked straight ahead. David tried to do the same, but something felt wrong. The air around them had changed. He could not explain it, but suddenly the space felt heavier. He glanced around and his stomach dropped. Aliens in the nearby seats were turning to look at them. Not at him, at her. And they were not just looking. They were bowing. Some dropped to their knees. Others pressed appendages to their bodies in gestures of respect. David felt ice slide down his spine. He looked at the woman again, really looked at her. The robes were not just beautiful, they were woven with thread that caught light like stars. Her posture was too perfect, too practiced. And now that he paid attention, he could see guards standing at attention 20 feet away. Guards in armor that probably cost more than his entire education. Oh no. Oh no. He started to stand. He had to get out of here. This was wrong. This was so incredibly wrong. The woman reached out and took his hand. Her grip was gentle but firm. She did not look at him when she spoke. Do not get up, she said. Her voice was soft but carried absolute authority. Stay here. David froze. His mind raced through every piece of galactic protocol he had studied. The seating arrangements. The colors. The position. This section was not for minor delegates. This was the throne section. and the woman holding his hand was Empress Myra, ruler of the Ascendant Throne, commander of 300 worlds, the single most powerful individual in known space, the woman whose decisions affected trillions of lives. He was holding hands with an empress. David could not breathe, could not think. Across the hall, he could see the actual human delegation. Ambassador Patricia Chun was staring at him with an expression of pure horror. Other humans were frantically checking their datapads. Some looked like they might faint. The assembly began. Lights dimmed. A voice spoke in a language that his translator tried to process. David heard none of it. All he could focus on was the warm pressure of Myra holding his hand. She did not let go. Minutes passed and she kept holding on. Her thumb moved slightly against his palm. Not nervous exactly, but not entirely calm either. David sat perfectly still. He was afraid that if he moved, he would somehow make this worse. How could he make this worse? He had accidentally sat in the seat reserved for the most important person in the galaxy. Cameras from 1,000 worlds were probably recording this moment. His face was being broadcast to every corner of known space. His career was over. His life was over. Humanity's entire reputation might be over. But then he noticed something. Myra's hand was trembling. Just slightly. So faint that he almost missed it. Her face remained perfectly composed, but her hand shook. She squeezed his hand when one of the speakers said something that made the crowd murmur. The squeeze was brief but desperate, like someone reaching for an anchor in a storm. David stopped panicking. Something else took over. Some instinct he did not know he had. This woman was powerful, yes. She ruled hundreds of worlds, yes. But right now in this moment she needed someone to hold on to. He squeezed back, gently, just enough to let her know he was there. Myra did not look at him, but her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. The trembling in her hands stopped. They sat like that through the entire opening ceremony. Two people holding hands in a room full of aliens and cameras and the weight of galactic politics. It should have been absurd. It should have been a disaster. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When the ceremony finally ended, Myra stood. She still held his hand. David stood with her because what else could he do? She spoke to the assembly. Her voice filled the hall without shouting. This human will accompany me to the evening reception. I find his company refreshing. Silence. Complete and total silence. Every being in that hall stared at them. Then slowly, carefully, the assembly began to disperse. Aliens whispered to each other. Delegates rushed to contact their home worlds. The human delegation looked like they might have a collective heart attack. Myra finally turned to look at David. Up close her eyes were dark brown and deeply intelligent. Walk with me, she said. We have much to discuss. And David, whose only plan for this summit had been to not embarrass Earth, found himself walking beside the most powerful woman in the galaxy while the universe watched and wondered what this could possibly mean. David walked beside Myra through corridors that seemed to shift and change as they moved. Guards followed at a respectful distance. Aliens stopped and stared. Some bowed so low their faces touched the floor. Others made gestures that his translator could not process. He tried to focus on walking straight, one foot in front of the other. Do not trip. Do not say anything stupid. Do not cause an intergalactic incident. Too late for that last one. Myra did not speak as they walked. She moved with perfect grace, like she had been trained her entire life to make every step look effortless. Probably because she had been trained her entire life. David felt clumsy and awkward beside her. His shoes squeaked on the smooth floor. They entered a large room filled with aliens in formal dress. The evening reception. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, even though David was pretty sure they were in space, and crystal chandeliers made no sense here. Tables covered in foods, he could not identify line the walls. Music played, but he could not see the musicians. Every head turned when they entered. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A server dropped a tray, and the crash echoed in the sudden silence. Myra did not react. She walked into the room like she owned it, which David supposed she kind of did. She owned a lot of things. A tall alien approached them. It had silver skin and too many arms and eyes that glowed faintly blue. David recognized the species from his briefing materials. Valkyrian, one of the oldest races in the galaxy. They had been serving the Ascendant throne for over 2,000 years. The alien spoke in a language that sounded like wind chimes. David Translator turned it into words. Your Majesty, this human should not be here. Protocol demands that he return to his delegation. Myra stopped walking. She did not raise her voice when she replied. Ambassador Kalen, I decide who stands beside me. Are you questioning my judgment? The alien named Kalen bowed quickly. All four of his arms crossed over his chest. Of course not, Your Majesty. Forgive my presumption. Good. Myra turned away from him and continued walking. David followed, feeling the weight of Kalen multiple eyes on his back. They passed more aliens. An insectoid creature that clicked disapprovingly. A floating jellyfish thing that pulsed different colors. A group of reptilian beings who whispered among themselves. David caught words like improper and human and scandal. His face burned. Back on Earth, he had been nobody. A low-level assistant who filed reports and made coffee. Now he was apparently causing a scandal that would probably make history books. Myra led him to a side door that opened onto a terrace. The view took his breath away. They were looking out into space itself. Stars stretched in every direction. A nebula glowed purple and gold in the distance. A planet hung below them, blue and green and beautiful. The terrace was empty. The noise from the reception faded as the door closed behind them. Finally, it was quiet. Myra walked to the railing and looked out at the stars. David stood a few feet away and tried to think of something to say. Everything that came to mind sounded stupid. You are afraid, she said. It was not a question. David nodded, then realized she was not looking at him. Yes, he said. His voice came out rough. I am terrified. Good. Myra turned to face him. Fear means you understand the situation. Many people who should be afraid are not. They think they understand power, but they do not. She leaned against the railing. In the starlight, she looked younger than she had in the assembly hall. David remembered from his briefing that she was 48 years old. She had been Empress for 30 years. Math said she had taken the throne at 18. I should apologize, David said, for sitting in your seat. I did not mean to. The translation program mixed up the seating chart, and I was lost, and I thought it was just an empty seat. I'm sorry. Myra studied him for a long moment. Then do you know why I told you to stay? No doubt, because when you sat down, you did not know who I was. You looked at me and saw another person. Not the Empress. Not the throne. Just someone sharing a space. She paused. Do you understand how rare that is? In 30 years, I have not had a single moment where someone did not know exactly who I was before they saw me. David did not know what to say to that. It sounded incredibly lonely. I am tired, Myra continued. She said it simply like she was stating a fact. I have been Empress since I was 18 years old. My family was killed in a political purge. I survived only because I was clever enough to make the right alliances and ruthless enough to punish the traitors. I have spent 3 decades making decisions that affect billions of lives. I have started wars to prevent worse wars. I have sacrificed worlds to save systems. I have done things that will haunt me until I die. She turned back to the stars. And through all of it, I have been alone. I have advisors and guards and servants and diplomats. I have people who would die for me. But I do not have anyone who sees me as Myra. Just Myra. Not the Empress who holds their fate in her hands. David felt something shift in his chest. He thought about his own life. His family back on Earth. His friends who called him on weekends. The coffee shop near his apartment where the owner knew his name. Small ordinary things that made life bearable. That he could not imagine 30 years without any of that. I'm sorry, he said again. But this time, he meant something different. Myra looked at him. For the first time, she smiled. It was small and sad, but real. You are honest. That is also rare. David decided to take a risk. Back on Earth, we have a saying. It does not matter how powerful someone is. Everyone needs someone who will be honest with them. Someone who sees them as a person first. Without that, power becomes empty. Myra considered this. Your species is very young. Only 15 years in galactic society. Most races dismiss you as naive. Maybe we are naive, David said. But maybe some things should not change just because you get older. Or more powerful. She laughed. It was quiet but genuine. I like you, David Kim. You sat in the wrong seat, and now you're lecturing an empress about philosophy. David felt his face go red. I did not mean to lecture. I just meant that maybe even an empress deserves to be treated like a person sometimes. Myra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I want to make you an offer. This summit lasts 10 days. I want you to be my companion for those 10 days. David blinked. I do not understand. Not an advisor, she clarified. Not a servant. Not a diplomatic liaison. Just someone who sits beside me. Someone who does not perform or calculate every word. Someone real. That sounds like a terrible idea, David said without thinking. Then he winced. I mean, the political implications would be enormous. My delegation would probably kill me. Half the galaxy already thinks I am some kind of spy or assassin. All of that is true, Myra agreed. But I am asking anyway. She met his eyes. I am facing something difficult. A threat that could lead to war. I have been managing it alone, and am close to breaking. I need 10 days with someone who will help me remember why any of this matters. Someone who sees beyond the throne. Why me? David asked. You could have anyone. Advisors, counselors, people who actually know what they are doing. Because you sat in the wrong seat. Because you held my hand when I needed an anchor. Because you were honest even when it might hurt you. She paused. Because I think you might actually see me. David looked out at the stars. He thought about his career. This could destroy it. Or make it. He thought about his family. They would be terrified. He thought about Earth and how this moment might affect all of humanity. But mostly he thought about the woman standing next to him. Powerful, yes. Important, yes. But also tired and lonely, and asking for help in the only way she knew how. He made his decision. Okay, he said. 10 days. I will stay. Myra smiled again. This time, it reached her eyes. Thank you, David Kim. You may have just saved my life in ways you cannot imagine. They stood on the terrace together and looked at the stars. Inside the reception, people were probably panicking. Diplomats were probably sending urgent messages to their home worlds. Ambassador Chun was probably planning how to explain this to Earth. But out here under the light of distant suns, two people who should never have met had found an unexpected connection. And for 10 days, at least they would face whatever came next together. Back on Earth, the news exploded like a supernova. Every channel, every feed, every screen showed the same image. David Kim holding hands with Empress Myra. The headlines were incredible. Some called him a hero. Others called him a threat. Most just called him confused. David's mother called 17 times in the first hour. His father sent a message that just said, "What did you do?" His sister posted a picture of him from high school with the caption, "My brother is either a genius or dead." The internet had opinions, and none of them were quiet. Ambassador Chun called him into a private meeting the morning after the reception. She looked like she had not slept. Her eyes were red and her hands shook when she pointed at the chair across from her desk. "Explain," she said. "Just explain what is happening." David tried. He told her about the seating chart error, about sitting in the wrong place, about Myra taking his hand and asking him to stay, about the conversation on the terrace and the 10-day agreement. Chun listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Do you understand what you have done?" she finally said. Her voice was carefully controlled. "You have put Earth in a position we are not prepared for. Every species in the galaxy is watching us now. Some see opportunity, others see threat. And you are at the center of it all. I know," David said. "I am sorry," Chun sighed. She rubbed her temples. "Sorry does not fix this. But maybe we can use it." She looked at him. "The Empress asked for you specifically. That means something. So here is what will happen. You will spend these 10 days with her as requested. You will be respectful. You will be careful. And you will remember that you represent all of humanity. Do you understand?" David nodded. "I understand. Good. And David," she added, "if you somehow manage to not start a war, I will make sure you never have to file paperwork again." He almost laughed. That was the best offer anyone had made him in years. The next 10 days were unlike anything David had imagined. He spent every waking hour with Myra, breakfast in her private quarters, meetings with advisors from across the galaxy, state dinners where he sat beside her and tried not to spill anything, negotiations that decided the fate of worlds. He learned quickly that being Empress meant making impossible choices. On the third day, a dispute between two colony worlds reached her desk. One world had resources the other needed. The other world had technology the first wanted. They had been fighting for 6 months. 12,000 people had died. Myra reviewed the reports. She listened to both sides present their cases. Then she made her ruling. The resource world would share, but the technology world would pay, and also accept refugees from the conflict zones. Neither side was happy. Both sides accepted. After the meeting, David asked her how she made such decisions. How did she choose? "I look for the solution that saves the most lives," she said. "That prevents the most suffering. Sometimes that means no one gets what they want. Sometimes it means sacrifice." She looked tired. "I have made thousands of these decisions. Everyone costs something." David thought about Earth history, about wars and peace treaties, about the hard choices leaders had made. But what about mercy, he asked. What about second chances? Myra gave him a strange look. Mercy is expensive. Second chances can be dangerous. In galactic politics, you must be certain. Hesitation costs lives. But David noticed something. When she said those words, she did not sound convinced. She sounded like she was repeating something she had been taught. On the 5th day, a crisis emerged. A transport ship carrying medical supplies to a plague zone had been delayed by bureaucratic red tape. 3 different agencies needed to approve the route. By the time all the approvals came through, 2,000 people would be dead. The traditional solution was to accept the losses. Procedures existed for a reason. Breaking them set bad precedents. David could not accept that. He spent an hour talking with Myra about it. About human history. About times when Earth faced similar problems. About how sometimes the best solution was to bypass the system entirely. What if we just send the ship, she asked. Ignore the approvals? That would cause problems, David admitted. But it would save lives. Is not that more important? It is not that simple, she said. But she looked thoughtful. In the end, Myra authorized an emergency override. The ship left immediately. The supplies arrived in time. 2,000 people lived who would have died. 3 agencies filed formal complaints. Myra ignored them. That night on the terrace, she said something that surprised him. "You made me question 3,000 years of procedure with one conversation. That should not be possible." But somehow it was. David did not know what to say. He just knew it felt right. The days continued. David noticed patterns. Every decision Myra made was calculated. Every word she spoke was measured. She lived in a world where mistakes echoed across centuries. The weight of it was crushing. But when they were alone on the terrace, or in quiet moments between meetings, she let that weight slip. She told him stories. About her childhood before the purge. About her parents who taught her to be kind before the galaxy taught her to be cold. About dreams she had given up when she took the throne. David shared his own stories. About his grandmother who had fled war on Earth. About growing up in a small apartment. About learning that every person has worth regardless of power or position. About human philosophy that said everyone deserves dignity. Myra listened like these were secrets. Maybe to her they were. On the 8th day during a state dinner, a dignitary from the Vulcarian Empire made a comment. Something about humans being too young to understand real politics. Too idealistic. Too emotional. David felt anger flash through him, but before he could respond, Myra spoke. "Emotion is not weakness," she said. Her voice cut through the conversation like a blade. Humans understand something that many older races have forgotten. That behind every decision, every treaty, every war, there are individuals who suffer or prosper. They do not hide from that truth. Perhaps we should learn from them instead of dismissing them. The table went silent. No one argued with an empress. Later, David asked her why she had defended humanity like that. "Because you are right," she said simply. "We've become so caught up in procedure and protocol that we forget the basic truth. Decisions affect people. Real people with lives and families and dreams. Humans remember that. Maybe because your species is young. Maybe because you have not had time to become cynical. Either way, it is valuable." She paused and added, "I have been Empress for 30 years. David, in that time I have not had a single friend. Not one person I could trust to see me instead of the throne. Then you sat in the wrong seat and everything changed. You remind me that I am still a person. That kindness still matters. That there is more to leadership than cold calculation." David felt something tighten in his chest. "I am just trying to help. I know," Myra said. "That is why it works. By the 10th day, something had shifted. Not just between them, but in the wider summit. Other delegates noticed how Myra listened to David, how she considered his perspectives. Some dismissed it. Others started asking questions about human approaches to problems. The human delegation went from being ignored to being consulted. Ambassador Chen led meetings with species that had never given Earth a second thought. Human ideas about conflict resolution started spreading through diplomatic channels. David did not realize it yet, but he had started something. A change in how the galaxy saw humanity. Not as naive children, but as a species with fresh perspectives on ancient problems. On the last night before the final day, Myra and David stood on their terrace one more time. Tomorrow the summit would end. The crisis she had mentioned would finally be revealed. Everything would change. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for these 10 days. For staying when you could have run. For being honest when others would have performed. For reminding me why any of this matters." David looked at the stars. He thought about his small apartment back on Earth, about his normal life, about how none of this should have happened. "I am glad I sat in the wrong seat," he said. Myra laughed. "So am I." They stood in comfortable silence. Two people from different worlds who had found understanding. Tomorrow would bring challenges. But tonight they had this moment of peace under the stars. The 10th day began with alarms screaming through Harmony Prime Station. David woke to flashing lights and a voice over the intercom speaking in a language his translator struggled to process. His door burst open and guards in heavy armor rushed in. "Come with us," one of them said. "The Empress requires your presence immediately." David barely had time to get dressed before they were escorting him through corridors filled with running soldiers. Something was very wrong. He could feel it in the air. They brought him to a command center deep in the station. Screens covered every wall, showing star maps, troop movements, diplomatic channels. In the center of it all stood Myra. She wore battle armor instead of her usual robes. Her face was set in hard lines. She turned when David entered. Her eyes softened just slightly when she saw him. "Good. You are here. We have a problem." The next hour was a blur of information. Intelligence officers briefed the room. Security chiefs gave reports. Military advisors argued about options. David tried to follow, but most of it went over his head. The basic truth was this. The Krasker Union had infiltrated the summit. They had planted agents among the delegates. Their plan was to assassinate key leaders and trigger a galactic war. The attacks were scheduled for that afternoon during the closing ceremony. Security had discovered the plot only hours before. They had captured most of the infiltrators, but the damage was done. The Krasker Union leadership knew their plan had been exposed. Now everyone had to decide what came next. Traditional galactic law was clear. Attempted assassination of this scale demanded war. The Ascendant Throne and its allies would be justified in attacking Krasker space immediately. Millions would die in the opening battles. Billions might die before it ended. But there was another problem. Intelligence suggested the Krasker Empress had not authorized this plan. Rogue elements within her military had acted without approval. She was likely just as shocked as everyone else. That did not matter according to Myra advisors. The Krasker government was responsible for its military. Honor demanded response. Protocol required blood. Myra listened to all of it. Her face revealed nothing. David stood against the wall and watched her. He saw the weight settling on her shoulders. She was about to make a decision that would define the next decade of galactic history. The advisors finished their presentations. Military options. Diplomatic options. Most of them involved war. Myra was silent for a long moment. Then she looked at David. "You have been quiet. What do you think?" Every head in the room turned to stare at him. David felt his mouth go dry. These were generals and admirals, and people who had been making these decisions for centuries. What could he possibly add? But Myra was waiting. She had asked him to stay for these 10 days, to give her honest perspective. He could not back down now. David took a breath. On Earth, we have a saying. The best way to end a war is to not start one. But if you must fight, make sure the other side has a way out. Otherwise, they fight to the death, and everyone loses. One of the Valkyrian generals made a dismissive sound. Philosophy is not strategy human. Maybe it should be, David said. His fear was fading, replaced by something else. Conviction, maybe. He said the Krasker Empress probably did not authorize this. That it was rogue elements. So why treat her like an enemy? Because she is responsible for her people, another advisor said. That is how galactic law works. David looked at Myra. But what if there was another way? What if instead of demanding war, you gave her a choice? Expose the plot publicly. Show everyone what was planned. Then invite the Krasker Empress to condemn it with you. Make the traitors the enemy, not her government. That is weakness, the Valkyrian general said. It shows hesitation. No, David said. It shows strength. It takes more courage to offer peace than to declare war. And it gives everyone a path forward. The Krasker Empress can save face by joining you against the real villains. Her people do not have to die for someone else's mistake. And you prevent a war that could kill billions. The room erupted in arguments. Half the advisors thought it was the stupidest thing they had ever heard. The other half thought it might work, but was too risky. Only Myra remained quiet. David continued. I know I am just a human. I know my species is young, and we do not understand your ancient protocols. But we understand war. Earth has had so many wars. And you know what we learned? The best victories are the ones where your enemy becomes your friend afterward. Every war we ended with punishment and revenge led to another war. Every war we ended with reconciliation led to peace. He looked around the room. You are about to start a war that will kill millions, maybe billions. And for what? To follow protocol? To preserve honor? Those things are important, but are they more important than lives? One of the admirals, a reptilian creature with scales like armor, spoke up. What you suggest is unprecedented. No one has ever handled a threat this way. Maybe that is the problem, David said. Maybe it is time for something unprecedented. Myra finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but carried absolute authority. Everyone be quiet. The room fell silent. She looked at David. Tell me honestly, do you believe this will work? David met her eyes. I believe it gives everyone a chance to choose peace. That is more than war gives anyone. Myra turned to her advisors. She was quiet for a moment, then she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. 30 years I have ruled. 30 years of following protocol and tradition and the way things have always been done. And in those 30 years, how many conflicts have we truly prevented? The advisors did not answer. Myra continued. This human who is not a soldier or a diplomat or even particularly important by galactic standards has given me more useful wisdom in 10 days than most of you have in decades. She let that sink in. We will do this his way. Prepare a public address. Contact the Krasker Empress. Let her know what we have discovered and offer her a choice. Stand with us against the traitors or stand alone against the galaxy. Your Majesty, one of the generals protested. This could backfire. If the Krasker refuse, we look weak. Then we deal with that if it happens, Myra said. But I will not start a war without trying this first. She looked at David. Sometimes the bravest choice is the one that risks looking weak to preserve something more important. The room slowly emptied as advisors went to carry out her orders. Soon only Myra and David remained. She walked over to him. You just changed the course of galactic history. You know that, right? I just suggested an idea, David said. You made the decision because you reminded me of something I had forgotten, Myra said. That leadership is not just about being strong. It is about being wise. About choosing the hard path because it is right, not because it is easy. She took his hand like she had that first day. What you said about your grandmother fleeing war, about learning that every person has worth. That is not naive, David. That is the truth every civilization should remember. I forgot it. My advisors forgot it. But you did not. David squeezed her hand. So, what happens now? Now we find out if the galaxy is ready for a new way. Myra looked at the screens showing star maps and troop positions. In 6 hours, I will make my address. The Krasker Empress will respond or she will not. Either way, you help me try. She turned back to him. Thank you, David Kim, for sitting in the wrong seat, for staying when I asked, for being brave enough to tell an empress that there is a better way. David smiled. For what it is worth, I think you were already looking for a better way. I just gave you permission to try it. Maybe, Myra said. But sometimes permission is all we need. They stood together in the command center. Outside the station continued its lockdown procedures. Across the galaxy, species waited to see what would happen. And in that room, 2 people from different worlds prepared to find out if choosing peace over protocol was wisdom or foolishness. In 6 hours, they would have their answer. The assembly hall was packed. Every delegate from every world had gathered for the closing ceremony. But the mood had changed. Word had spread about the assassination plot. Guards lined every wall. Tension filled the air like static before a storm. David stood backstage with Myra. She had changed back into her ceremonial robes. The armor was gone, but the weight remained in her eyes. In a few moments, she would walk onto that stage and gamble the fate of billions on a human idea about peace. "Are you ready?" she asked him. David laughed nervously. "I should be asking you that. I have made thousands of speeches," Myra said. "This is the first one that truly frightens me." She looked at him. "If this goes wrong, if the Krasker refuse my offer, the galaxy will see it as weakness. They will test the throne. Wars will come. And if it goes right," David said. "If the Krasker Empress accepts, then you will have prevented those wars without firing a shot." Myra smiled. "You make it sound simple. Maybe it should be simple." David stepped closer. "You told me once that you needed these 10 days to remember why any of this matters. Did they help?" "Yes," Myra said quietly. "They did. You reminded me that behind all the protocol and politics, there are people. Real people who deserve a chance at peace. I almost forgot that. A signal came from the stage manager. It was time." Myra straightened her robes. She became the Empress again in that moment. All traces of uncertainty vanished behind a mask of authority. But before she walked out, she squeezed David's hand one more time. "Stay close," she said. "I may need an anchor again." Then she stepped onto the stage. The assembly fell silent. Cameras from 1,000 worlds focused on her. David watched from the wings. Myra spoke. Her voice carried across the hall without amplification. She told them about the plot, about the infiltrators caught and questioned, about the planned assassinations that would have triggered Galactic War. The assembly listened in shocked silence. Then she did something unprecedented. She displayed the evidence publicly. Communications between the conspirators. Plans for the attacks. Proof that rogue elements within the Krasker military had acted without authorization from their government. "Many of you will call for war," Myra said. "Tradition demands it. Protocol requires it. An attack of this scale cannot go unanswered." The assembly murmured agreement. War seemed inevitable, but Myra continued. "I have spent 30 years following tradition. 30 years of doing what protocol requires. And in those years I have started 3 wars, prevented a dozen more, and made countless decisions that cost lives." She paused. "A human recently asked me a question. He asked if honor was more important than lives. If protocol was worth more than peace." David felt every camera shift slightly. They were looking for him now. "I did not have a good answer," Myra said, "because I had never truly asked myself that question. We do things the way they have always been done. We follow the ancient paths. But what if those paths are wrong? What if there is a better way?" She turned to face a specific section of the assembly. The Krasker delegation sat there. Their Empress Valeria watched with an expression David could not read. "Empress Valeria," Myra said, "your military betrayed you. Rogue elements acted without your authority and nearly started a war that would have destroyed both our empires and many others. Traditional law says I should hold you responsible, that your empire should pay for their crimes." The hall held its breath. "But I do not want tradition today," Myra continued. "I want peace. So I make you this offer. Stand with me. Condemn these traitors together. Let us show the galaxy that we are not enemies, but allies against those who would steal peace from our peoples. Let us choose wisdom over war. Silence. Complete and absolute silence." Every being in that hall waited to see what Valeria would do. The Krasker Empress stood slowly. She was tall and imposing. Her skin had a metallic sheen. Her eyes glowed with an inner light. She looked at Myra for a long moment. Then she spoke. Her voice was deep and resonant. The Krasker Union has stood for 10,000 years. We pride ourselves on strength, on military might, on never backing down from a challenge. David felt his heart sink. This was it. She was going to refuse. But Valeria continued. Strength is not just about warfare. True strength is knowing when to fight and when to seek a better path. These traitors acted without my authority. They betrayed not just the Ascendant Throne, but their own Empress. They sought war for their own gain. She stepped forward. Empress Myra has offered me a choice. She could have declared war. She would have been justified. Instead, she offers partnership. She offers wisdom. She paused. The Krasker Union stands with the Ascendant Throne. We condemn these traitors together. We choose peace. The hall erupted. Not in violence, but in shock. Delegates stood and shouted. Some in approval. Some in protest. But the decision was made. War had been averted. David felt his legs give out. He sat down hard on an equipment box. He had not realized how terrified he had been until the fear left him. Myra and Valeria stood together on the stage. Guards from both empires moved in to coordinate the arrest of the remaining conspirators. The summit that had almost ended in war would end in an unprecedented alliance. Later, after the ceremony, after the celebrations after 1,000 diplomatic meetings, David found himself on the terrace one last time. The summit was over. Tomorrow he would return to Earth, back to his normal life. Except nothing would be normal again. Myra joined him. She looked exhausted but satisfied. You did it, David said. We did it, she corrected. Your idea saved billions of lives today. I just suggested something, David said. You were brave enough to try it. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Myra reached into her robes and pulled out a small device. A diplomatic credential. I am creating a new position, she said. Human representative to the Ascendant Throne. It does not exist in protocol yet, but I am the Empress. I can create new protocols. She handed him the credential. The position is yours if you want it. David stared at the device. This was insane. This would change his entire life. He would have to leave Earth, live on alien worlds, navigate galactic politics. Everything would be different. But he thought about what Myra had said, about needing someone who saw her as a person, about how lonely it was to rule alone. He thought about how one human perspective had helped prevent a war. He thought about all the other leaders out there, all the other impossible decisions, all the places where human wisdom about mercy and second chances might make a difference. I accept, he said. Myra smiled. Good, because I am not finished changing the galaxy. And I need someone to remind me why it matters when I forget. Over the next 5 years, things changed. The method they had used became known as the Human Protocol. Other conflicts adopted similar approaches, offering enemies a way to become allies, choosing reconciliation over revenge. It did not work every time, but it worked often enough. David worked from the Ascendant capital. He became a bridge between humanity and the throne. His friendship with Myra deepened into a partnership that transformed galactic politics. Earth went from being ignored to being respected. Not for military power, but for wisdom. The Human Protocol resolved 3 major conflicts in those 5 years. Countless smaller disputes ended peacefully because someone remembered to ask if there was a better way. Myra became known as the Reform Empress. She started questioning other ancient protocols, making changes that seemed impossible. Always she had David beside her asking the simple questions that no one else thought to ask. 5 years after the summit, David stood in the same assembly hall. Another gathering, another crisis. But this time, he was not lost. He knew exactly where he belonged. A young human diplomat approached him. She looked terrified, carrying too many datapads. Overwhelmed by the grandeur around her. First summit, David asked kindly. She nodded frantically. I have no idea what I am doing. David smiled. Let me tell you a story. It is about the time I sat in the wrong seat and changed the galaxy. He led her to a quiet spot and began to talk. About mistakes that become opportunities. About how ordinary people can make a difference. About how the galaxy needed fresh perspectives. The young diplomat listened with wide eyes. When he finished, she asked, "You really think I can do something important here?" David thought about Myra waiting for him in the conference room. About the work they still had to do. About all the changes yet to come. "I think everyone can do something important," he said. "You just have to be brave enough to stay when it would be easier to run." Later that night, David found Myra on a terrace overlooking the capital. 5 years, and they still found their way to terraces and starlight. Another successful negotiation, she said. "You are getting good at this." "I had a good teacher," David said. They stood together looking at the stars. Two people from different worlds who had found something rare in a galaxy of trillions. Understanding, partnership, friendship. "Do you ever regret it?" Myra asked. "Sitting in that wrong seat?" David thought about his old life. His small apartment. His ordinary existence. Then he thought about everything that had come after. The challenges. The growth. The difference he had made. "Never," he said. "Best mistake I ever made." Myra laughed. "Mine too." And under the light of distant stars in a galaxy, slowly learning that there were better ways than the old ways, two friends stood together and planned for tomorrow. Because the work was never finished. There would always be conflicts to resolve. Leaders who needed wisdom.